A man finds a crying black boy abandoned in a trash can, his tiny hands clutching a tattered blanket. Heartbroken, he rescues the child and takes him in, vowing to give him the love he was denied. But years later, a chilling phone call changes everything.
You think he's safe, but they're watching. They've found him, and they're coming.
Who's coming? What do you mean?
You have no idea what you're up against. Protect him before it's too late.
A cryptic message, a powerful family, and a dark past begin to unravel. Who left the boy to die, and why? As buried secrets resurface, the truth could either destroy them or set them free. What will he uncover, and how far will he go to protect the boy he now calls his son? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Nathan Daniels pulled his shirt tighter against the autumn chill as he locked up his small clinic downtown. The afternoon streetlights cast long shadows across the empty sidewalk, their amber glow flickering intermittently in the darkness. It had been another exhausting day of treating patients, and his shoulders felt heavy with fatigue. The warm air was crisp and still, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the rustling of fallen leaves. Nathan fumbled with his car keys, his mind already drifting to the stack of paperwork waiting for him at home. That's when he heard it, a faint whimper carried on the night breeze, so soft he almost missed it. He froze, keys suspended in midair. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of a child crying, coming from the narrow alley between his clinic and the abandoned warehouse next door. Nathan's heart quickened as he turned toward the sound.
Hello? Who's out there?
The crying continued, more distinct now. Nathan pulled out his phone and switched on its flashlight, sweeping the beam across the ground as he cautiously made his way into the alley. The crying grew louder, leading him to a large metal trash can pushed against the wall. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. There, wrapped in a dirty, threadbare blanket, lay a black toddler, no more than 2 years old. The child's face was streaked with tears, his small body shivering in the cold. Nathan's medical training kicked in immediately as he reached down and gently lifted the boy from the trash can.
It's okay, little one. You're safe now,
he whispered, cradling the child against his chest. The toddler's cries softened to hiccuping sobs as Nathan examined him for injuries.
Who could leave a baby out here like this? What kind of person does that?
As he adjusted the blanket, something caught his eye. A piece of paper sewn into the corner with careful, deliberate stitches. With trembling fingers, he pulled it free and unfolded it under the beam of his phone light. The message, written in hurried handwriting, made his blood run cold.
Protect him at all costs. They will come for him.
Nathan glanced around the empty alley, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The child sniffled and pressed his face into Nathan's coat, tiny fingers clutching the fabric. Without hesitation, Nathan hurried back to his clinic, unlocking the door with one hand while holding the boy securely with the other. Inside, under the bright fluorescent lights, Nathan could better assess the child's condition. Besides being cold and frightened, the toddler appeared healthy. Nathan wrapped him in a clean blanket from the supply closet and warmed a bottle of pediatric electrolyte solution he kept on hand. As the boy sipped the drink, his dark eyes never leaving Nathan's face, Nathan wrestled with what to do next. He should call the police or child services. That would be the proper procedure. But something about that cryptic note made him hesitate.
I wonder who put this weird note here. What kind of danger could this innocent child be in?
The toddler had stopped crying completely now, his small body relaxing as warmth and comfort replaced fear. He reached up with one tiny hand and touched Nathan's cheek, the simple gesture of trust breaking something open in Nathan's heart.
Just for tonight. I'll take you home just for tonight, and we'll figure this out in the morning.
Nathan murmured, more to himself than to the child. He gathered the boy in his arms along with some basic supplies from the clinic. As he carried him out to the car, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. The weight of the child in his arms felt both terrifying and right, like a responsibility he hadn't known he was waiting to accept. Sunlight streamed through Nathan's bedroom window, and for a moment he was disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds coming from his living room. The patter of small feet and the occasional thump of objects being moved brought yesterday's events rushing back. He sat up quickly, his heart racing. In the living room, he found the baby playing by himself. The boy looked up at Nathan with bright, curious eyes, and a smile spread across his small face.
Good morning, little guy. I suppose we should figure out what to call you.
He knelt beside the child, who immediately crawled into his lap.
How about Jordan? That was my grandfather's name.
The toddler giggled and reached for Nathan's face, which he took as approval.
Jordan it is, then.
The morning brought a series of challenges Nathan hadn't anticipated. His usually organized routine dissolved into chaos as he attempted to prepare breakfast with one hand while holding Jordan with the other. The box of cereal he found in his cupboard seemed inadequate for a growing toddler, and his coffee went cold as he struggled to find something more substantial.
I really don't know what I'm doing,
Nathan muttered, watching Jordan pick at the banana he'd managed to find. The child needed proper clothes, diapers, and who knew what else. More importantly, he needed help figuring out what to do next. With a deep breath, Nathan made the call he'd been dreading. His sister Diane answered on the third ring, her voice cautious.
Nathan? This is unexpected.
An hour later, Nathan stood on Diane's front porch, Jordan balanced on his hip. His sister opened the door, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion as she took in the sight before her.
Nathan, what's going on?
Diane asked, stepping aside to let them in. Her home was warm and inviting, filled with family photos and comfortable furniture. Everything his apartment wasn't.
I found him last night. He was abandoned outside my clinic,
Nathan explained, settling Jordan on the living room floor with some toys Diane quickly provided. He pulled out the note and handed it to her. Diane read the note, her social worker's composure slipping for a moment.
And you didn't call the authorities?
I know I should have, but something about that note, Diane. I couldn't just hand him over without understanding what it means.
You can't just keep a child, Nathan. There are procedures, regulations, and your job. You work impossible hours. How would you manage?
I'll figure it out. I've already called the clinic. I'm cutting back my hours, redistributing my patient load.
Diane raised an eyebrow. You've never taken a day off in your life, and now you're restructuring your entire practice for a child you found yesterday?
Yes.
The simplicity of his answer seemed to surprise them both. That afternoon, with Diane's help, Nathan began the foster care application process. She knew the system, knew which forms to file and who to call. As they worked through the paperwork, Jordan napped on Diane's couch, his small chest rising and falling peacefully.
You understand this won't be easy. Being a single parent, especially to a child who might have experienced trauma.
Nathan looked up from the papers, his expression determined.
I know, but when I found him, Diane, it felt like fate.
That evening, Nathan tucked Jordan into a makeshift bed in his spare room, using blankets Diane had insisted on sending home with them. As he watched the toddler drift off to sleep, the mysterious note weighed heavily in his pocket. Who had written it? What danger could possibly threaten this innocent child? The weeks following Jordan's arrival transformed Nathan's life in ways he never expected. His once sterile clinic now featured a small play area in the corner of the waiting room, filled with donated toys from his staff and regular patients. The sound of Jordan's giggles echoed through the halls, bringing warmth to a place that had previously felt purely clinical. Dr. Daniels, his secretary Minda called one morning. I think someone needs your attention. She nodded toward Jordan, who was carefully arranging files on a tiny table. Nathan watched as Jordan held a toy too, his face scrunched in concentration. Just like Daddy, the boy announced proudly, causing Nathan's heart to swell. The word Daddy still felt new and precious every time Jordan said it. Nathan adjusted his schedule to ensure he could give Jordan proper attention. He started taking Wednesday afternoons off, using the time to visit parks or read stories together. These simple moments filled a void in Nathan's life he hadn't even known existed. One evening, as Nathan was locking up the clinic, something caught his eye. A black sedan sat across the street, its engine running. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see the driver. The sight sent a chill down his spine, reminding him of the warning note he'd found with Jordan. "Come on, buddy," Nathan said, lifting Jordan into his arms. "Time to go home." As he approached his car, he glanced back at the sedan. The vehicle's headlights suddenly flared to life, and it peeled away from the curb, disappearing around the corner with a screech of tires. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he secured Jordan in his car seat. At home, Nathan went through their evening routine, trying to shake off his unease. Jordan splashed happily in the bathtub, oblivious to his father's concerns. After tucking Jordan in with his favorite stuffed elephant, Nathan went to check the mail he'd collected earlier. Among the usual bills and medical journals, he found a plain white envelope with no return address. His name was typed, not handwritten, on the front. Inside was what appeared to be a blank piece of paper, but when he turned it over under the kitchen light, his blood ran cold. There, barely visible, was an imprint of the same peculiar symbol he'd found on Jordan's blanket the night he discovered him. Nathan sank into a kitchen chair, the paper trembling in his hands. The car, the envelope, these weren't coincidences. Someone was watching them, someone who knew about Jordan. The warning from the note suddenly felt very real. They will come for him. He got up and checked all the windows and doors, drawing the curtains tight. In Jordan's room, the boy slept peacefully, clutching his elephant. Nathan stood in the doorway, watching his son's chest rise and fall, a fierce protectiveness washing over him. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he whispered into the darkness. "I promise." Diane Daniels stood in the middle of Nathan's transformed living room, taking in the sight of colorful building blocks scattered across the floor and crayon drawings proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Her brother's usually immaculate apartment now showed clear signs of a child's presence everywhere she looked. "I have to admit, I never thought I'd see your place looking so lived in," she said, picking up a stuffed elephant from the couch. Jordan sat at the kitchen table, happily munching on apple slices while coloring in his favorite dinosaur book. Nathan gathered some toys from the floor. "Things change, Diane. I've changed." "That's what worries me," Diane said softly, keeping her voice low so Jordan wouldn't hear. "This isn't like buying a house or changing jobs, Nathan. This is a child's life we're talking about. Have you really thought about what that means long-term?" Nathan straightened up, meeting his sister's concerned gaze. "I think about it every day. Every decision I make now considers Jordan first. I've never been more certain about anything in my life." "But your work, your research, all those plans you had? They're still there," Nathan replied, glancing at Jordan with a gentle smile. "They've just shifted to make room for what's really important." Diane sighed, running her hand through her hair. "I just don't want either of you to get hurt. Fostering isn't always permanent, and with his background being so mysterious." "He's my son now, Diane," Nathan said firmly. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The tension hung heavy between them, years of unspoken family history mixing with present concerns. Later that afternoon, Nathan took Jordan to their favorite park. The autumn air was crisp and fallen leaves crunched under their feet as Jordan ran toward the playground. Nathan followed, keeping a watchful eye on his son. As Jordan climbed the jungle gym, Nathan noticed a familiar dark sedan parked across the street. His heart rate quickened when he spotted a man in a tailored gray suit standing near the park's entrance. The stranger wasn't doing anything obviously suspicious, but his attention seemed fixed on Jordan. Nathan's protective instincts flared. The man's presence felt deliberate, calculated. When the stranger began walking toward the playground, Nathan quickly called out, "Jordan, time to go, buddy." "But Daddy, I just got here," Jordan protested from the top of the slide. "I know, but we need to pick up some groceries before dinner," Nathan said, trying to keep his voice calm despite his racing heart. "We'll come back another day, I promise." Jordan reluctantly climbed down and Nathan scooped him up, holding him close as they walked briskly to their car. He could feel the man's eyes following them, but he didn't dare look back. That evening, after putting Jordan to bed, Nathan methodically checked every window and door in the apartment. He tested the locks twice, drew all the curtains, and even wedged a chair under the front door handle. Standing in the darkened living room, he debated calling the police, but what would he tell them? That someone was watching them at the park? That he'd seen a car multiple times? Without concrete evidence of a threat, they'd likely dismiss his concerns as paranoia. Yet the warning note that had been wrapped around Jordan that night felt more ominous than ever. Nathan settled into the armchair facing the front door, determined to keep watch. Jordan's peaceful breathing drifted from his bedroom, reminding Nathan of everything he stood to lose if he failed to protect him. Years have passed and Nathan became the father figure Jordan needed. Nathan sat at his desk late one night, Jordan's tattered blanket spread before him under a desk lamp. The house was quiet except for the soft whir of the heating system and Jordan's gentle snoring from down the hall. He traced his fingers over the cryptic warning note for the 100th time, but tonight something caught his eye, a faint watermark he hadn't noticed before. Grabbing his magnifying glass from the drawer, Nathan leaned in closer. There, barely visible in the fabric's weave, was what appeared to be an ornate family crest. He could make out what looked like a lion rampant and some kind of bird, perhaps an eagle. Below were the faint letters CF. CF, Nathan muttered to himself, pulling his laptop closer. He spent the next hour searching through local historical records and family genealogies, making notes as he went. His eyes were growing tired when his phone buzzed, startling him. The number wasn't one he recognized. He almost let it go to voicemail given the late hour, but something made him answer. Dr. Daniels? The woman's voice was familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. This is Margaret Stevens. I used to work as a nurse at your clinic. Margaret? Yes, of course. Nathan remembered her now. She'd retired about 2 years ago. Is everything all right? There was a pause on the line. We need to talk, Dr. Daniels. About Jordan. Her voice dropped lower. I've been keeping something to myself that I shouldn't have, but after seeing that car watching the clinic lately, she trailed off. Nathan's pulse quickened. What do you know about Jordan? Not over the phone, Margaret said firmly. Can we meet tomorrow? Somewhere public? They agreed to meet at the Daily Grind, a quiet cafe a few blocks from the clinic. Nathan barely slept that night, his mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, after dropping Jordan off at daycare, Nathan arrived early at the cafe. He chose a corner table where they could talk privately. Margaret arrived precisely on time, looking exactly as he remembered, silver-haired and grandmotherly, but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Thank you for meeting me, she said, settling into her chair with a cup of chamomile tea. I should have told you this long ago, but I promised her I wouldn't unless it became necessary. Promised who? Margaret's hands tightened around her cup. Sarah Mitchell, Jordan's mother. Nathan leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. You knew his mother? She worked at the clinic as a medical assistant before your time, Margaret explained. Such a sweet girl and smart too, but she made the mistake of falling for Thomas Caldwell. Caldwell? Nathan's mind went to the crest on the blanket. Of the Caldwell family? Margaret nodded grimly. Old money, lots of influence in this town. Thomas was charming at first, but after they married... She shook her head. The abuse started slowly, a push here, a slap there. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, she knew she had to get out. The Caldwells, they're not people you want to cross. So she left Jordan at the clinic, Nathan said softly, pieces falling into place. She chose your clinic specifically, Margaret confirmed. I'd told her about you, about your kindness with patients. She knew you'd make sure Jordan was safe. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She was so desperate to protect him from that family, from their influence and corruption. The night she left him, she made me promise not to tell anyone unless I thought Jordan was in danger. And now? Nathan prompted, his mouth dry. I've seen that black sedan watching the clinic. I recognize the driver. He works for the Caldwells. They must have finally traced Jordan here. Nathan's hands shook slightly as he dialed Diane's number. The weight of Margaret's revelations pressed heavily on his shoulders. When his sister answered, her voice was thick with sleep. Nathan, it's 6 in the morning. What's wrong? I need to see you. Now. It's about Jordan. 20 minutes later, they sat in Nathan's kitchen, coffee mugs steaming between them. Diane listened intently as Nathan shared everything Margaret had told him about Sarah Mitchell and the Caldwells. Her social worker's composure cracked as the story unfolded. The Caldwells? Diane's face paled. Nathan, they practically own half the town. Thomas Caldwell's father is on the hospital board and his uncle's a judge. I know. Nathan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. But what am I supposed to do? Just hand Jordan over to them? Of course not. Diane reached across the table and squeezed his hand. But we need to be smart about this. The Caldwells aren't people you can just stand up to without consequences. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Jordan appeared in his Spider-Man pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. At 12 years old now, he was growing tall and lanky, but his eyes still held that same sweetness that had captured Nathan's heart in the alley years ago. Dad? Aunt Diane? Jordan looked between them, confusion clear on his face. Is everything okay? Nathan forced a smile. Everything's fine, buddy. Your aunt just stopped by for breakfast. Want some pancakes? Jordan nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. As Nathan moved to the stove, he could feel his son's worried gaze following him. The boy was perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. He'd noticed the tension in the air, the whispered conversations, the extra precautions Nathan had been taking lately. Dad? Jordan asked later as Nathan plated the pancakes. You've been acting weird. Did I do something wrong? Nathan's heart clenched. He set down the plate and pulled Jordan into a tight hug. No, buddy. You haven't done anything wrong. I'm just dealing with some grown-up stuff at work. Nothing for you to worry about. The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, but Nathan couldn't bring himself to tell Jordan the truth yet. Not until he knew they could keep him safe. Later that afternoon, Nathan and Diane sat in the polished office of Emma Rodriguez, one of the city's top family law attorneys. The walls were lined with degrees and awards, but Nathan found himself more reassured by the pictures of Emma's own children displayed prominently on her desk. The situation is complicated, Emma said, reviewing the documents they'd brought. The Caldwells have significant influence, but they also have vulnerabilities. If Thomas Caldwell was abusive, as you say, we can use that. And abandonment works in our favor too. But, Nathan prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. But they have resources we can only dream of. They could drag this out in court for years, and during that time, she left the implications hanging. During that time, they could make our lives very difficult, Diane finished. Emma nodded gravely. We need to be strategic. First, we document everything. Every suspicious car, every strange incident. Second, we need to gather evidence about Thomas Caldwell's abuse. And third, we need to file for permanent custody before they make their move. Nathan straightened in his chair. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. Jordan is my son, and I'm not letting anyone take him away. The years had flown by, transforming the tiny toddler Nathan had found into a tall, thoughtful 14-year-old. Jordan Daniels stood in front of Crestwood High School, his new backpack hanging from one shoulder as students streamed past him toward the entrance. Nathan's silver sedan idled at the curb. You've got this, buddy, he said through the open window. Remember, I'm just a phone call away if you need anything. Jordan nodded, managing a small smile. Thanks, Dad. The words still filled Nathan with warmth, even after all these years. As Jordan walked up the concrete steps, he took in the imposing brick building with its gleaming windows and proud home of the Crestwood Lions banner. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he kept his expression neutral, just like his dad had taught him. You must be Jordan, a cheerful voice caught his attention. A girl with curly brown hair and bright eyes approached him. I'm Emily Carter. Mrs. Thompson asked me to show you around. Oh, thanks. Jordan felt some of his tension ease at her friendly smile. Emily proved to be an excellent guide, pointing out classrooms and sharing little tips about which teachers were strict and which water fountains actually worked. The cafeteria's down this way, she explained, leading him through the bustling hallway. Watch out for the third step on these stairs. It squeaks like crazy. By lunchtime, Jordan had started to feel more comfortable. He sat with Emily and a few other students she'd introduced him to, unpacking the lunch his dad had carefully prepared that morning. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation and laughter. That's when he heard it. "Yeah, that's the new kid. Dr. Daniels' adopted son," a voice whispered from the table behind him. Jordan's hand froze halfway to his sandwich. "I heard there's something weird about how he got adopted," another voice added. "Like he wasn't even through an agency or anything?" "My mom says there were all these strange rumors back then." Jordan's appetite vanished. He glanced at Emily, but she was absorbed in conversation with another student. The whispers continued, each one hitting him like a tiny dart. Mysterious past. Nobody knows where he came from. Dr. Daniels just showed up with him one day. That evening, Jordan sat at the kitchen table watching his dad prepare dinner. Nathan moved efficiently around the kitchen, chopping vegetables and checking the timer on the oven. Everything about him was familiar. The way he rolled up his sleeves, his methodical movements, the slight furrow in his brow when he concentrated. "Dad?" Jordan's voice came out smaller than he intended. "Hmm?" Nathan looked up from the cutting board. "What was I like as a baby? Do you have any pictures?" Nathan's knife paused mid-chop. "There are some photos in the albums," he said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." Jordan traced patterns on the tablecloth. "What about before you adopted me? Do you know anything about where I came from?" Nathan's movements became more deliberate, his shoulders tense. "That was a long time ago, Jordan. What matters is that we're family now." "But how was your first day?" Nathan interrupted, his voice forcefully cheerful. "Did you meet any new friends?" Jordan recognized the deflection. He'd seen his dad do it before when certain topics came up. Something cold and uncertain settled in his stomach. "Yeah," he answered quietly. "It was fine." That night, lying in bed, Jordan stared at his ceiling. The whispers from lunch echoed in his head, mixing with his dad's evasive answers. There was something his father wasn't telling him, something about his past that everyone seemed to know pieces of except him. He rolled onto his side, decision made. If his dad wouldn't tell him the truth, he'd have to find it himself. Jordan stood in his father's study, rifling through drawers in search of extra pencils for his geometry homework. The familiar scent of old books and coffee filled the room, usually a comfort, but now tinged with frustration as he came up empty-handed. His hand brushed against the bottom drawer of the desk, the one that had always been locked. Something about it nagged at him today. Maybe it was the whispers at school or his dad's evasive answers, but Jordan couldn't ignore it anymore. He remembered the trick Emily had shown him with bobby pins. "Just in case you get locked out," she'd said with a mischievous grin. His hands trembled slightly as he worked the lock, and after a few tense minutes it clicked open. Inside lay a manila folder worn at the edges. Jordan's heart pounded as he lifted it out. A photograph slipped free, floating to the floor like an autumn leaf. He picked it up, and his breath caught in his throat. The woman in the photo had his same warm brown eyes and gentle smile. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, standing in front of what looked like a hospital. On the back, written in faded ink, "Sarah, Spring 2009. Beneath the photo lay a piece of paper, its edges frayed. Jordan recognized the words immediately. They'd haunted his dreams sometimes, though he didn't know why. "Protect him at all costs. They will come for him." The room suddenly felt too small. Jordan stuffed everything back in the drawer, his mind racing. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to get them. 30 minutes later, he stood in the doorway of his Aunt Diane's office at the community center. She looked up from her computer, her welcoming smile fading as she saw his expression. "Jordan, what's wrong?" He pulled the photograph and note from his backpack, placing them on her desk with shaking hands. "Who is she?" His voice cracked. "And what does this note mean?" Diane's face paled as she looked at the items. She picked up the photograph, her fingers tracing its edges. "Where did you find these?" "Dad's desk." Jordan crossed his arms. "Everyone at school whispers about my mysterious past. Dad won't tell me anything." I thought you would. Diane set the photo down carefully, her movements deliberate. Jordan, honey, it's not my place to. Not your place? Jordan's voice rose. I deserve to know the truth. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why does everyone seem to know something I don't? You're right, Diane said softly. You do deserve the truth. But it needs to come from your father. He loves you so much, Jordan. Everything he's done has been to protect you. Protect me from what? Jordan demanded, but Diane just shook her head. Frustrated and hurt, Jordan left the community center. The afternoon sun felt too bright, too cheerful. He found himself walking to the park where he and Emily often met after school. As if summoned by his thoughts, she was there, sitting on their usual bench. Hey! Emily called out, then frowned as he got closer. What happened? You look like someone kicked your puppy. Jordan dropped onto the bench beside her and told her everything. The drawer, the photograph, the note, and Diane's non-answers. Emily listened intently, her forehead creased in concentration. So your dad's been keeping secrets, she said finally. But maybe there's a good reason? I mean, that note sounds pretty serious. I just want to know the truth, Jordan said quietly. Emily's eyes lit up with determination. Then let's find it. My mom's a librarian. She can help us search old newspapers, public records, anything from around when you were little. There has to be something. For the first time that day, Jordan felt a glimmer of hope. You'd help me? Of course, Emily smiled. That's what friends are for. Besides, I love a good mystery. The library's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jordan and Emily hunched over the microfiche reader. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows, and the familiar smell of old books surrounded them. They had been searching for hours, their eyes growing tired from scanning countless newspaper articles. This is like looking for a needle in a haystack, Emily whispered, adjusting the focus on another page of the Cedar Grove Gazette from 2009. But we can't give up. Jordan nodded, rubbing his eyes. They had found plenty about the Caldwell family. Their business dealings, charity events, and social gatherings filled the society pages. One name kept appearing: Thomas Caldwell, the youngest son of the family dynasty. The Caldwells practically owned this town, Jordan muttered, jotting down notes. Real estate, banking, even the old textile mill. He paused at an article showing Thomas Caldwell at a hospital fundraiser. Something about the man's cold eyes made Jordan shiver. Emily suddenly grabbed his arm. Jordan, look at this. She pointed to a small article about Nathan's clinic. In the background of a grainy photograph, a young nurse stood partially visible. That woman, she looks just like the one in your photo. Jordan leaned closer, his heart racing. The image was blurry, but there was no mistaking those kind eyes and gentle smile. Below the photo, a caption listed the clinic staff, including Sarah Mitchell, RN. Sarah Mitchell, Jordan repeated softly. The name stirred something in his memory, a late-night conversation he'd overheard years ago when he was supposed to be asleep. Nathan's voice, tight with emotion, saying that name to Aunt Diane. We need to check the clinic records, Emily said, her eyes bright with excitement. Your dad keeps old files in storage, right? Back at home, Jordan waited until Nathan left for his evening rounds at the hospital. He crept into the basement where boxes of old clinic records were stored. Emily kept watch upstairs, ready to text if Nathan returned early. The storage boxes were labeled by year. Jordan pulled out 2009, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the lid. Inside, dozens of manila folders held patient records and administrative documents. Near the bottom, he found what he was looking for: employee files. Sarah Mitchell's personnel file was thin compared to the others. Jordan carefully opened it, and his breath caught. Her signature was there on the employment forms, the same distinctive handwriting as the note that had been wrapped in his blanket. He spread the documents side by side on the concrete floor. The loops of the S, the way the T's were crossed, it was unmistakable. Sarah Mitchell had written that desperate note. Sarah Mitchell had left him at the clinic. Sarah Mitchell was his mother. Jordan sat back against the wall, emotions crashing over him like waves. The woman in the photograph wasn't just some stranger from his past. She was his mother. Jordan sat back against the wall, emotions crashing over him like waves. The woman in the photograph wasn't just some stranger from his past. She was the person who had given him life, who had made the heartbreaking choice to leave him in Nathan's care. "Jordan?" Emily's soft voice came from the top of the stairs. "Are you okay down there?" He couldn't answer right away. His throat felt too tight, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Finally, he managed to call back, "I found her, Em. I found my mom." Emily came down the stairs and sat beside him, her shoulder touching his in silent support as they looked at the evidence spread before them, the pieces of a puzzle that was finally starting to take shape. Jordan stood in Nathan's study, his hands trembling as he held the photograph and note. The evening light cast long shadows across the room, making the moment feel even more dramatic. Nathan looked up from his desk, his expression changing from confusion to recognition as he saw what Jordan held. "Who is Sarah Mitchell?" Jordan's voice cracked slightly. "And why have you been lying to me all these years?" Nathan's shoulders slumped and he slowly removed his reading glasses. The weight of 14 years of secrets seemed to press down on him. "Sit down, Jordan," he said softly. "No," Jordan replied firmly. "I want the truth. Now." Nathan rubbed his temples, looking older than Jordan had ever seen him. "Sarah Mitchell. She worked at my clinic years ago. She was your birth mother." The words hit Jordan like a physical blow, even though he'd suspected it. Hearing the confirmation made his knees weak. He sank into the leather chair across from Nathan's desk. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jordan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to protect you," Nathan replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "Sarah was... she was in a difficult situation. She trusted me to keep you safe." "Safe from what? From who?" Jordan demanded, his anger rising. "I deserve to know. All these years, I thought maybe I wasn't wanted, that I was just abandoned, but she left me that note. She left me with you on purpose." Nathan's eyes flickered with something Jordan couldn't quite read. Was it fear? "Jordan, there are things about your past that are complicated, things that could be dangerous." "More secrets?" Jordan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm tired of secrets. I'm not a little kid anymore. I can handle the truth." But Nathan just shook his head, his expression pained. "Please understand, some things are better left in the dark." Jordan's voice rose. "Like me? Like my whole life?" He backed away from the desk, clutching the photograph. "I thought we were family. I thought you trusted me." "Jordan, wait," Nathan called after him, but Jordan was already rushing out of the study. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and fled into the cool evening air. 20 minutes later, Jordan sat across from Emily at their favorite cafe, the Daily Grind. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh-baked cookies did little to calm his churning emotions. Emily listened intently as he recounted the confrontation with Nathan. "He still won't tell me everything," Jordan said, staring into his untouched hot chocolate. "It's like he thinks I'll break if I know the truth." Emily reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Maybe he really is trying to protect you? By lying?" Jordan shook his head. "I'm done with protection. I need answers." "Then let's find them," Emily said, her eyes bright with determination. "If Sarah Mitchell worked at the clinic, there must be ways to track her down. We could start with social media, maybe check public records." Jordan looked up at his friend, feeling a spark of hope for the first time that evening. "You'd help me find her?" "Of course," Emily smiled. "That's what best friends are for." The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees as Jordan and Emily walked down Cedar Street, checking house numbers against the address they'd found in old clinic records. The neighborhood was quiet, with well-maintained gardens and white picket fences that spoke of a community where everyone knew each other. "This is it," Emily said, pointing to a pale blue house with white trim. "Number 247. Jordan's heart pounded as they approached the front door. An elderly woman was tending to her roses, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She looked up as they approached. "Mrs. Jenkins?" Jordan asked, his voice slightly shaky. "I'm Jordan Daniels, and this is my friend Emily. We're hoping to ask you about someone who used to live here. Sarah Mitchell?" Mrs. Jenkins's weathered face softened at the name. "Sarah Mitchell? My goodness, I haven't heard that name in years. She straightened up slowly, removing her gardening gloves. Would you like some lemonade? We can talk on the porch. Minutes later, they sat in comfortable wicker chairs, cool glasses in hand. Mrs. Jenkins' eyes grew distant as she recalled the past. Sarah was such a lovely person, she said, her voice warm with memory, always helping others at that clinic of hers. She lived here for about 2 years, kept to herself mostly, but always had a kind word for everyone. Jordan leaned forward. What happened to her? Mrs. Jenkins's expression darkened. It was strange how she left. One day she was just gone. But before that, she glanced around as if checking for listeners. There was this man, expensive suit, fancy car. He'd park across the street watching her house. I saw him talking to other men too. They all had that same look about them, like they were important people who didn't want to be noticed. Did you know who they were? Emily asked gently. Well, Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice. I heard the name Caldwell mentioned once. Everyone around here knows that family. They practically own half the city. The man seemed to work for them. Sarah was terrified of him, I could tell. And then just like that, she disappeared. Jordan's hands tightened around his glass. Each revelation felt like another piece of a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to complete. As they thanked Mrs. Jenkins and walked back down the street, Emily nudged Jordan's arm. Look, she whispered. Across the street, a black sedan was parked under a maple tree. Through the tinted windows, they could make out a man in a dark suit watching them intently. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but his presence felt threatening. Jordan and Emily quickened their pace. When they looked back again, the car was pulling away smoothly, leaving them with an unsettling feeling that they'd stumbled onto something bigger than they'd imagined. Jordan, Emily said quietly, I think we're not the only ones interested in your past. Jordan watched the car disappear around the corner, his mind racing with questions about Sarah Mitchell and the mysterious Caldwell family. Meanwhile, Nathan's office phone rang just as he was finishing up with his last patient of the day. The familiar voice of Margaret Stevens, trembling with urgency, came through the line. Nathan, they're looking for him again. The Caldwells, they've hired new people to find Jordan. Margaret's words sent a chill down Nathan's spine. I overheard 2 men at the coffee shop discussing their search. They mentioned your clinic. Nathan's hands grew cold as he gripped the phone tighter. Are you sure, Margaret? Absolutely. These weren't ordinary private investigators. They looked dangerous. Nathan immediately tried calling Jordan's cell phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Come on, Jordan, pick up, he muttered, panic rising in his chest. After the 3rd failed attempt, he called Diane. Nathan, what's wrong? Diane answered, picking up on the tension in his voice. I can't reach Jordan. Margaret just called. The Caldwells are actively searching for him again. Nathan's voice cracked. Can you help me track his phone? I'll be right there. I have a contact in the police department who can help us locate his signal. Meanwhile, at the public library, Jordan and Emily sat huddled over a computer terminal in the archives section. Old newspaper articles filled the screen, each one revealing more about the Caldwell family's dark history. Look at this, Emily whispered, pointing to a headline from 15 years ago. Thomas Caldwell investigated for corporate fraud and suspected criminal connections. Jordan scrolled through the article, his heart racing. Another headline caught his eye. Caldwell Industries security chief arrested in harassment case. There's more, Emily said, clicking through to another article. Several of Caldwell's associates were charged with intimidation and stalking. The cases were mysteriously dropped. Jordan's hands trembled as he read about Thomas Caldwell's obsessive search for his ex-wife. The article mentioned Sarah Mitchell by name, describing how she had fled after filing domestic abuse charges. He never stopped looking for her, Jordan said quietly, the weight of understanding settling over him. For us. Emily squeezed his arm supportively as they continued reading. Document after document revealed a pattern of violence, corruption, and relentless pursuit. Thomas Caldwell had used his wealth and connections to silence opponents and track down anyone who crossed him. Jordan, Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I think I understand why Dr. Daniels kept this from you. These people, they're really dangerous. The gravity of the situation hit Jordan full force. The mysterious car, the man in the suit, the years of secrecy, it all made terrible sense now. The library's closing announcement echoed through the nearly empty building as Nathan and Diane burst through the doors. Their footsteps echoed across the marble floor as they rushed toward the archives section, where they spotted Jordan and Emily hunched over a computer screen. "Jordan!" Nathan's voice cracked with relief. The teenager looked up, his face a mix of anger and fear. "I guess now you have to tell me everything," Jordan said, gesturing to the articles on the screen. Back at home, they gathered in the living room. Emily sat close to Jordan on the couch while Diane perched on the armchair. Nathan paced, his shoulders heavy with the weight of years of secrecy. "Sarah Mitchell was more than just a nurse at my clinic," Nathan began, his voice soft but steady. "She was a brave woman who came to us seeking help. She was married to Thomas Caldwell, but their marriage was..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It was violent. He hurt her, Jordan." Jordan's hands clenched into fists. "My father..." "Thomas Caldwell is a powerful man who uses that power to control and intimidate others," Nathan continued. "When Sarah discovered she was pregnant with you, she knew she had to escape. She planned everything carefully, disappeared in the middle of the night, and stayed hidden until you were born." Tears welled up in Jordan's eyes. "But why did she leave me?" "She left you at my clinic because she knew the Caldwells were closing in. The note she left, she knew I would protect you. She'd seen how I cared for my patients, especially children." Nathan's voice trembled. "She made the hardest choice a mother could make to keep you safe from him." Emily squeezed Jordan's hand as he absorbed this information. The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the heating system. "I understand now," Jordan said finally, looking up at Nathan. "Why you kept it secret. Why you've been so protective. You were honoring her sacrifice." Diane leaned forward. "We've all been trying to protect you, Jordan, but maybe it's time we took a more active approach. Sarah's last known residence might hold some answers. Documents, evidence, something we could use to keep the Caldwells away permanently." "I want to help," Emily said firmly. "Jordan's my best friend, whatever you need." Jordan stood up and walked to Nathan, wrapping his arms around the man who had raised him. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Nathan hugged him back tightly, relief washing over him at finally sharing the truth. The weight of secrets lifted, replaced by the strength of family united in purpose. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Nathan loaded the last bag into his SUV. Jordan sat quietly in the back seat with Emily, while Diane checked the map on her phone one final time. The weight of their mission hung heavy in the air. "Everyone ready?" Nathan asked, his voice gentle but determined. The others nodded silently as he started the engine. The drive to Willow Creek took 3 hours. Jordan spent most of it staring out the window, occasionally whispering to Emily about the rolling countryside. Diane kept glancing back at her nephew, her eyes full of concern. When they arrived in Willow Creek, the small town welcomed them with its tree-lined streets and historic buildings. The Willow Creek Inn stood at the corner of Main Street, its Victorian architecture a testament to times long past. Mrs. Lillian Harper, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, greeted them at the front desk. As Nathan signed the guest register, Jordan couldn't help asking about his mother. "Sarah Mitchell?" Mrs. Harper's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh yes, I remember her well. Such a sweet young woman. She stayed here for almost 6 months, right in our attic room." The group exchanged meaningful looks. Nathan stepped forward. "Would you be willing to tell us more about her?" Mrs. Harper nodded sympathetically. "Follow me," she said, leading them up 3 flights of creaking stairs to the attic. "She left some things behind when she disappeared. I always meant to sort through them, but..." She unlocked the door with an old brass key. The attic room was small but charming, with slanted ceilings and a dormer window. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that filtered through the glass. In one corner sat a trunk covered with an old sheet. Mrs. Harper pulled away the sheet, revealing a wooden chest. "Everything's just as she left it," she said softly. Jordan's hands trembled as he opened the trunk. Inside, they found a leather-bound diary and a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Each envelope was addressed simply, "To my dearest Jordan." Emily squeezed Jordan's shoulder as he picked up the first letter. Nathan watched his son's face, seeing the emotions play across it. Hope, sadness, love. Diane wiped away tears as Jordan began to read his mother's words silently. The diary lay open on his lap, revealing Sarah's neat handwriting and the story of a mother's desperate love for her child. The room fell silent except for the occasional rustle of paper and Jordan's shaky breathing as he connected with his mother's words for the first time. Back in their cozy room at the Willow Creek Inn, Jordan sat cross-legged on the bed, Sarah's diary open in his trembling hands. Nathan, Diane, and Emily gathered around him, their faces soft with emotion as he began to read aloud. "My dearest Jordan," he started, his voice catching slightly. "Today you smiled for the first time. It was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. In that moment, I knew I would do anything to keep you safe and happy." Tears welled in Jordan's eyes as he continued reading. Sarah's words painted pictures of tender moments, his first steps, his infectious laugh, the way he would reach for her hair when she held him close. But between these joy-filled passages lay darker entries, describing her growing fear of Thomas Caldwell and his threatening behavior. "I can't let him near our baby," Jordan read, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas becomes more dangerous each day. His family's influence makes it impossible to seek help through normal channels. But I have a plan to keep Jordan safe." Emily reached over and squeezed Jordan's hand as Nathan paced near the window, his jaw tight with emotion. Diane dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. As Jordan turned the page, a folded paper slipped from between the diary's pages. Emily carefully unfolded it, revealing a hand-drawn map of the area around Willow Creek. In the corner was a small heart, and near the center a spot marked with a star and the words "For Jordan" in Sarah's neat handwriting. "Look at this," Emily said softly, spreading the map on the bed. The group leaned in to study it. The marked location appeared to be in a wooded area just outside town. "We should go there tomorrow," Jordan said firmly, looking up at Nathan. "Mom left this for me. It has to be important." What they didn't see was the black sedan parked across the street. Inside, Agent Richard Lawson spoke quietly into his phone. "They've found something," he reported. "Mitchell left them a map." On the other end of the line, Thomas Caldwell's voice crackled with barely contained anger. "Follow them. Don't intervene yet. I want to know exactly what Sarah left behind." Lawson watched as shadows moved behind the inn's curtained windows, where the Daniels family continued to pore over Sarah's writings, unaware of the eyes monitoring their every move. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Jordan led the way along the forest path, clutching Sarah's map in his hands. Nathan, Diane, and Emily followed close behind, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the gentle sounds of birdsong. "The marking shows it should be just ahead," Jordan said, his voice trembling with anticipation. As they rounded a bend in the trail, a massive oak tree came into view, its ancient branches spreading wide over a small clearing. Jordan's hand shook as he compared the map to their surroundings. "This is it. This is the tree." Nathan pulled a small shovel from his backpack, and together they began to dig near the oak's massive roots. The earth was soft and dark, and after several minutes of careful digging, Emily's shovel struck something solid. "I found something!" she exclaimed. Working together, they carefully unearthed a weathered metal box about the size of a shoebox. Though tarnished by time, it had been well sealed, protecting its contents from the elements. Jordan sat cross-legged on the ground, the others gathering close as he carefully opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, lay a collection of treasures that brought tears to his eyes. There were photographs, dozens of them, images of Sarah holding a baby Jordan, her face radiant with love. Pictures of his first steps, his first birthday, moments he had no memory of but now could finally see. "Look how happy she was," Diane whispered, touching one of the photos gently. Beneath the photographs, they found carefully preserved baby clothes, a tiny knit hat, and a well-loved stuffed rabbit. Each item told a story of a mother's deep love for her child. At the bottom of the box lay a silver locket. Jordan lifted it with trembling fingers, reading the engraving aloud. "My love protects you always." Nathan placed a gentle hand on Jordan's shoulder. "Your mother's love has been with you all along, Jordan. Everything she did to keep you safe." Jordan clutched the locket to his chest, tears flowing freely now. The physical proof of his mother's love overwhelmed him. Every item in the box was a testament to how deeply Sarah had cared for him, how carefully she had planned to preserve these memories for him to find. Emily gently squeezed his hand as he lifted the locket's chain over his head, letting it rest against his heart. In that moment, surrounded by family in the peaceful clearing, Jordan felt closer to his mother than ever before. The sun was setting as they made their way back to the inn, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Jordan held the box of memories close to his chest, the silver locket gleaming around his neck. The peaceful moment shattered when a figure emerged from between two parked cars. "Jordan Daniels," Agent Richard Lawson said, his voice cold and authoritative. "You need to come with me. The Caldwell family has rights that need to be addressed." Nathan immediately stepped in front of Jordan, his protective instinct flaring. "You have no authority here. Stay away from my son." Lawson reached into his jacket, producing what looked like identification. "I represent the interests of Thomas Caldwell. The boy belongs with his real family." "We are his real family," Diane said firmly, already pulling out her phone. Her fingers quickly dialed the local sheriff's number while keeping her eyes fixed on Lawson. Emily moved closer to Jordan, gripping his arm supportively as he clutched Sarah's box tighter. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Sheriff Reed, this is Diane Daniels. We need your help immediately outside the Willow Creek Inn. There's a man here threatening to take my nephew." Lawson's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake. Mr. Caldwell has considerable influence. This can go easily, or it can go badly." "The only place Jordan is going is home with us," Nathan declared, his voice unwavering. Minutes that felt like hours passed until the sound of sirens filled the air. Sheriff Marcus Reed's patrol car pulled up, its lights painting the scene in flashes of red and blue. "What seems to be the problem here?" Sheriff Reed asked, stepping out of his vehicle. He was a tall man with gray-streaked hair and keen eyes that took in the situation quickly. "This man is trying to take my son," Nathan explained, not backing down. Sheriff Reed turned to Lawson. "I'm going to need to see some credentials, sir." Lawson hesitated, then produced his identification again. Sheriff Reed examined it carefully under his flashlight. "This isn't any kind of official law enforcement ID," Sheriff Reed stated firmly. "You have no authority to take anyone anywhere. I suggest you leave now before I decide to bring you in for attempted kidnapping." Lawson's composure cracked slightly. He glanced at Jordan one last time before backing away. "This isn't over," he muttered, then turned and walked quickly to a black sedan parked down the street. Sheriff Reed watched until Lawson's car disappeared around the corner. "I'll have my deputies keep an eye out for him. You folks should be careful. Want me to escort you back to the inn?" "Yes, please," Diane answered, her hand still protectively on Jordan's shoulder. "And thank you, Sheriff Reed." Back in their room at the inn, Nathan paced while talking on the phone with Emma Rodriguez. Jordan sat on the edge of the bed, turning the locket over in his hands, while Emily and Diane listened intently to the conversation. "Yes, Emma, he directly threatened to take Jordan," Nathan explained, his voice tense. "We need to know our options." Emma's voice crackled through the speaker. "Document everything. I'll file for an emergency restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. We'll need statements from everyone present, including Sheriff Reed. Any security cameras at the inn?" "I'll check with Mrs. Harper," Diane offered, already heading for the door. Mrs. Lillian Harper was more than willing to help. Her eyes lit up with purpose as she listened to their situation. Sarah was such a kind soul, she said, shaking her head. I remember how scared she was of that awful man. Listen, half the town knew her when she stayed here. My sister Ruth at the diner, old Mr. Peterson at the hardware store. They'd all vouch for her character. That would be incredibly helpful, Diane said warmly. We need to show the court that Sarah had good reason to protect Jordan from the Caldwells. While the adults discussed legal strategies, Jordan fidgeted with the locket's clasp. It suddenly popped open differently than before, revealing a tiny compartment he hadn't noticed. Inside was a folded piece of paper, worn but preserved. Emily, look at this, he whispered, carefully unfolding it. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's, matching her diary entries. My dearest son, if you're reading this, you've found your way back to pieces of our story. Know that every day away from you has been agony, but keeping you safe was worth any pain. Trust in those who have protected you. They are your true family, bound by love rather than blood. Thomas Caldwell will never stop searching. His obsession with controlling our lives has only grown darker with time. Stay vigilant, stay close to those who love you, and most importantly, stay brave. You were born with a warrior's heart. All my love, Mom. Jordan's hands trembled as he finished reading. Emily squeezed his shoulder while Nathan and Diane moved closer, forming a protective circle around him. We'll fight this together, Nathan promised, his voice firm with conviction. The Caldwells won't get anywhere near you. Mrs. Harper knocked on the doorframe. I've made some calls, she announced. There are at least 6 people who want to help. They'll be here first thing tomorrow to give their statements. The show of support from this small town brought tears to Jordan's eyes. He clutched the letter to his chest, feeling his mother's love surrounding him through the words she'd left behind, and the family who stood beside him now. The morning sun filtered through the inn's conference room windows as Dr. Nathan Daniels spread documents across the large oak table. Jordan sat between Emily and Diane, watching as Emma Rodriguez methodically organized Sarah's letters, photographs, and the testimonies they'd gathered from townspeople. These statements from the locals are compelling, Emma said, adjusting her reading glasses. Mrs. Harper's account of Sarah's time here, especially her fear of Thomas Caldwell, establishes a clear pattern of threatening behavior. Jordan held his mother's locket, drawing strength from it as Sheriff Marcus Reed entered the room. A woman in a crisp suit followed him, her badge gleaming at her hip. Everyone, this is FBI agent Lisa Monroe, Sheriff Reed announced. She's been tracking the Caldwell family's activities for the past 3 years. Agent Monroe's expression was serious but kind as she addressed the group. The Caldwells have been involved in numerous illegal operations, but they've always managed to stay just ahead of prosecution. Your case, Jordan, could be what finally brings them to justice. She opened her briefcase, pulling out several files. We can offer you full federal protection. In return, we need your cooperation in building our case against Thomas Caldwell. Nathan moved protectively closer to Jordan. What exactly would that involve? Primarily testimony and access to your evidence, Agent Monroe explained. We'll ensure your safety throughout the entire process. As the adults discussed legal strategies, Jordan and Emily slipped outside. The late afternoon air was cool as they walked along the shore of Lake Willow, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I'm scared, Emily, Jordan admitted, kicking a small stone into the water. Not just of the Caldwells, but of everything changing again. Just when I thought I understood my life. Emily stopped walking and turned to face him. Change isn't always bad, Jordan. Look at all the people fighting to protect you. Your mom made sure you'd be safe and loved, and she was right. I know, Jordan said softly, watching ripples spread across the lake's surface. It's just overwhelming sometimes. The FBI, the protection, the danger. It feels like something out of a movie, not my life. But you're not facing it alone, Emily reminded him, her voice gentle but firm. You've got your dad, because that's who Dr. Daniels really is, no matter what biology says. You've got Diane and me, and now all these people who knew your mom. We're stronger together. Jordan managed a small smile, grateful for Emily's unwavering support. The setting sun painted the lake in shades of gold and pink, reflecting the warmth he felt from his growing circle of protectors and friends. The legal document arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official seal gleaming ominously in the sunlight streaming through the inn's windows. Dr. Nathan Daniels' hands trembled slightly as he read the custody lawsuit filed by Thomas Caldwell. Jordan, who had been eating breakfast with Emily, noticed his father's distress immediately. "What is it, Dad?" Jordan asked, the word "dad" coming naturally now, despite all the recent revelations. Nathan's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Thomas Caldwell is suing for custody. He's claiming his rights as your biological father." Diane, who had been reviewing case notes with Emma Rodriguez, rushed to read the document over Nathan's shoulder. Her face paled. "He's requesting an emergency hearing. He's trying to fast-track this." Emma Rodriguez immediately took charge of the situation, her professional demeanor a steadying influence in the room. "This is an aggressive move, but not unexpected. We need to coordinate with Agent Monroe immediately." Within hours, their hotel room transformed into a makeshift legal office. Emma worked tirelessly, surrounded by stacks of documents detailing Thomas Caldwell's history. Agent Monroe arrived with several thick folders marked "classified." "These files document Caldwell's connection to multiple criminal enterprises," Agent Monroe explained, spreading photographs and reports across the table. "While we haven't had enough evidence for criminal charges yet, this information will be valuable in family court." Throughout the day, a steady stream of Willow Creek residents arrived at the inn, each carrying their own memories of Sarah Mitchell. Mrs. Harper organized them efficiently, helping Emma's team record their statements and notarize their affidavits. Sarah was terrified of Thomas, Mrs. Harper testified, her voice firm and clear. She'd wake up screaming some nights. That's not the kind of man who should have custody of any child. Jordan sat quietly in a corner with Emily, watching the proceedings with a mixture of fear and amazement. "I can't believe all these people are here to help," he whispered to her. "They knew your mom and they believe in you," Emily replied, squeezing his hand supportively. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop across town, Mark Stevens sat across from a well-dressed man representing the Caldwell family. The young paralegal, struggling with mounting debts, listened intently as the man slid a thick envelope across the table. "Mr. Caldwell is very interested in the details of Ms. Rodriguez's defense strategy," the man said smoothly. "This is just the first installment." Mark thought of his Aunt Margaret, who had helped bring this case to light, as he picked up the envelope. But the weight of his financial troubles overshadowed his conscience. Later that afternoon, he secretly photographed key documents from Emma's files, sending them to an encrypted email address. Back at the inn, the defense team worked late into the evening, unaware of the betrayal. Emma organized their arguments methodically, focusing on Nathan's years of dedicated parenting and the documented evidence of Thomas Caldwell's violent past. "We have a strong case," Emma assured them. "The judge will have to consider Jordan's best interests above all else." Nathan looked at Jordan, who had fallen asleep on the small couch, Emily keeping watch beside him. The sight strengthened his resolve. "We'll fight this with everything we have," he declared, his voice steady despite his fears. Diane placed a supportive hand on her brother's shoulder. "Together," she added firmly. "We'll fight this together." The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the county courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Dr. Nathan Daniels sat rigidly in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap as Judge Patricia Reynolds entered the courtroom. Jordan sat beside him, looking smaller than his 14 years in his freshly pressed suit. Thomas Caldwell commanded attention from the opposite table, his expensive suit and confident demeanor reflecting years of privilege and power. His attorney, Richard Ellis, arranged documents with practiced precision, occasionally sharing quiet words with his client. "The court will now hear custody petition case number 2023 FC 156, Caldwell versus Daniels," Judge Reynolds announced, her voice carrying authority through the hushed courtroom. Richard Ellis rose smoothly, his tailored suit rustling as he approached the bench. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Thomas Caldwell, is seeking to establish his parental rights and gain custody of his biological son, Jordan. Mr. Caldwell has undergone extensive personal growth and rehabilitation over the past years." Ellis presented a series of carefully curated documents, certificates from anger management programs, character testimonials from business associates, and proof of charitable donations. As you can see, Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell has transformed his life with the sole purpose of reuniting with his son. Jordan tensed visibly as Thomas Caldwell took the stand, delivering a seemingly heartfelt testimony about his journey to become a better man. "I've made mistakes," Caldwell admitted, his voice catching with well-rehearsed emotion. "But I've changed. I want to know my son." Emma Rodriguez rose for cross-examination, her expression determined. She called Margaret Stevens to the stand first. The former nurse's testimony was clear and unwavering. "I witnessed Sarah Mitchell come to the clinic multiple times with injuries she tried to hide," Margaret testified, her voice steady. "She confided in me about Mr. Caldwell's violent outbursts and her fear for her unborn child's safety." Mrs. Lillian Harper followed, her testimony painting a vivid picture of Sarah's time in Willow Creek. "That poor girl was terrified," she declared. "She'd jump at every shadow thinking he'd found her." Emma then presented Sarah's letters, her voice strong as she read passages detailing the abuse. Jordan's eyes filled with tears as his mother's words echoed through the courtroom, describing her desperate choice to leave him with Nathan to ensure his safety. Just as Judge Reynolds began taking detailed notes, Richard Ellis rose with a knowing smile. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that directly contradicts the defense's claims." He produced documents that mirrored their strategy exactly, along with prepared counterarguments for each point. Emma's eyes widened slightly as she recognized confidential details from their private strategy sessions. She glanced at Agent Monroe, who nodded imperceptibly, already making mental notes about potential security breaches. "Your Honor," Emma said, maintaining her composure, "I request a brief recess to review this new evidence." Judge Reynolds studied the room carefully before responding. "The court will take a 30-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 11:45. As the courtroom began to clear, Nathan placed a protective hand on Jordan's shoulder, guiding him toward the hallway. Diane joined them, her social worker's training helping her notice the subtle signs of distress in both her brother and nephew. Emma and Agent Monroe huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed tones about the leaked information, while Thomas Caldwell and Richard Ellis shared satisfied glances across the room. The battle for Jordan's future hung precariously in the balance, as both sides prepared for the next round of testimony. During the court recess, Emma Rodriguez gathered her team in a small conference room down the hall from the courtroom. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows, illuminating the concern on everyone's faces. Agent Lisa Monroe stood by the door, her trained eyes scanning each person in the room as Emma spoke. "Someone leaked our strategy," Emma said, spreading case files across the wooden table. "Every single detail we planned to present was known to the opposition. This didn't happen by accident." Diane Daniels, drawing from years of social work experience, observed the body language of each team member. Her attention settled on Mark Stevens, who kept shifting in his chair and avoiding eye contact. His fingers drummed nervously against his coffee cup. "Let's review who had access to our complete strategy," Agent Monroe suggested, pulling out a notepad. As she listed names, Mark's fidgeting increased noticeably. Dr. Nathan Daniels watched the young paralegal carefully. He remembered how Margaret Stevens had mentioned her nephew's recent financial troubles, though she'd been vague about the details. The pieces started falling into place. Emma noticed the same signs. She exchanged meaningful glances with Nathan and Agent Monroe before addressing the group. "Take 15 minutes, everyone. Mark, could you stay behind? We need to discuss some documentation." As the others filed out, Mark Stevens remained seated, his face pale and hands trembling slightly. Nathan closed the door quietly, while Emma pulled up a chair directly across from Mark. "Mark," Emma said gently, "we know about the leak. We just need to understand why." The young paralegal's composure crumbled. Tears welled up in his eyes as he buried his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "My mom's medical bills. They're overwhelming. We're about to lose everything." Nathan felt a mix of anger and compassion. "The Caldwells approached you?" Mark nodded miserably. "They offered enough to cover all the bills, plus 6 months of care. I was desperate, but I never wanted to hurt Jordan. I've seen how much you care for him, Dr. Daniels. Emma leaned forward, her voice firm but understanding. Mark, what you did was wrong, but we can still make this right. Are you willing to help us? Looking up with red-rimmed eyes, Mark nodded eagerly. Anything. I'll do anything to fix this. Agent Monroe stepped away from the door, her expression thoughtful. We could use this to our advantage. The Caldwells trust you now. Emma's eyes lit up as a plan formed. We could feed them false information through Mark, let them think they're still one step ahead. We'll need to make it convincing, Nathan added, warming to the idea. Give them something they'll want to use in court, but something we can definitively prove wrong. They spent the next few minutes outlining their strategy. Mark would provide the Caldwells with detailed information about supposed witnesses who would testify about Nathan's negligent care of Jordan. When Ellis presented this evidence in court, Emma would reveal proof that these witnesses didn't exist, discrediting the Caldwells' entire case. Are you sure about this? Mark asked, wiping his eyes. What if they figure it out? Agent Monroe will ensure your protection, Emma assured him, and I promise we'll find a way to help with your mother's medical bills, legally this time. As they finalized the details, Nathan checked his watch. They had 7 minutes until court resumed. The plan was risky, but it might be their best chance to protect Jordan from Thomas Caldwell's influence. Mark straightened his tie, composing himself. With newfound determination, he prepared to play his part in their carefully orchestrated counter-strategy. The fate of Jordan's future now partially rested on his ability to convince the Caldwells that he was still their loyal informant. The courthouse buzzed with tension as everyone filed back into the courtroom. Jordan sat between Nathan and Diane, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The polished wooden benches creaked as people settled in, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows. Richard Ellis strode to the center of the courtroom, his expensive suit perfectly pressed and a confident smile playing on his lips. Your Honor, he began, adjusting his tie, I'd like to present new evidence regarding Dr. Daniels' fitness as a guardian. Judge Patricia Reynolds nodded, her stern face betraying no emotion. Proceed, Mr. Ellis. Ellis produced a stack of documents with flourish. We have testimony from multiple witnesses stating that Dr. Daniels regularly leaves Jordan unsupervised for extended periods, often working late into the night with no proper child care arrangements. Nathan's jaw tightened, but Emma Rodriguez placed a calming hand on his arm. She knew what was coming. Ellis continued, naming specific dates and incidents that Mark had fabricated. Furthermore, we have evidence of missed school conferences, neglected medical appointments, and numerous instances of Jordan being left alone overnight. Emma rose slowly, her expression composed. Your Honor, may I respond to these allegations? Please do, Ms. Rodriguez. Emma approached the bench with her own set of documents. I find it interesting that Mr. Ellis mentions these specific incidents, particularly because we anticipated this exact move. She distributed papers to the judge and opposing counsel. These are official records from Jordan's school, medical facilities, and our own security systems. They prove, without doubt, that every single incident Mr. Ellis just described is completely fabricated. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Thomas Caldwell's face darkened as he whispered urgently to his attorney. Furthermore, Emma continued, we have evidence that Mr. Caldwell's team attempted to manufacture false testimony through coercion and bribery. She nodded to Agent Lisa Monroe, who stepped forward. Your Honor, Agent Monroe announced, her FBI badge gleaming. The FBI has been investigating Thomas Caldwell for multiple federal offenses, including witness tampering and obstruction of justice. We have recorded evidence of Mr. Caldwell attempting to bribe individuals to testify falsely against Dr. Daniels. Judge Reynolds' expression grew stern as she reviewed the documents. Mr. Ellis, do you have any response to these serious allegations? Ellis tugged at his collar, his earlier confidence evaporating. Your Honor, we were simply presenting the evidence provided to us by our investigators. Evidence that has been thoroughly debunked, Judge Reynolds stated flatly. She turned her attention to Thomas Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, this court takes a very dim view of attempts to manipulate justice through false testimony and intimidation. Jordan gripped Nathan's hand tightly as Judge Reynolds shuffled her papers, preparing to deliver her verdict. Having reviewed all evidence presented, including the deplorable attempts to deceive this court, I find no merit whatsoever in Mr. Caldwell's petition for custody. She looked directly at Nathan and Jordan. Dr. Nathan Daniels has demonstrated exemplary care and dedication as Jordan's guardian. Therefore, I am dismissing Mr. Caldwell's claim and granting full legal guardianship to Dr. Daniels. The judge's gavel cracked against the sound block, its sharp report echoing through the courtroom. Jordan threw his arms around Nathan, tears of relief streaming down his face. Diane wiped her eyes while Emily Carter, sitting in the gallery, broke into a wide smile. Thomas Caldwell stormed out of the courtroom, his face twisted with rage, as Agent Monroe signaled to other FBI agents stationed near the exits. They moved quickly to intercept him, ready to serve the federal warrants that would ensure he could never threaten Jordan's safety again. The courthouse erupted in chaos as FBI agents moved swiftly to surround Thomas Caldwell. Agent Lisa Monroe stepped forward, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Thomas Caldwell, you're under arrest for witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of criminal conspiracy, she announced firmly, producing handcuffs. Caldwell's face contorted with rage as the agents secured his wrists. You can't do this to me? Do you know who I am? He shouted, struggling against their grip. Your family name won't protect you anymore, Agent Monroe replied calmly, reading him his rights as they led him away. Back in Willow Creek, the inn buzzed with celebration. Mrs. Lillian Harper had transformed the dining room into a festive gathering space with homemade treats covering every surface. Townspeople filled the room, their voices warm with joy and relief. I knew Sarah's boy would be all right, Mrs. Harper said, patting Jordan's shoulder. Your mother would be so proud of how brave you've been. Margaret Stevens hugged Jordan tightly. You have your mother's spirit, she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. The following morning, under a gentle autumn sky, Jordan stood before a simple headstone in Willow Creek Cemetery. Nathan, Diane, and Emily gathered close behind him, offering silent support. The marble marker read, Sarah Mitchell, beloved mother, her love knows no bounds. Jordan knelt and placed a bouquet of white lilies against the cool stone. His fingers traced the engraved letters of his mother's name as tears rolled down his cheeks. Emily squeezed his shoulder gently. Hi, Mom, Jordan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I found your letters. I know how hard you fought to protect me. He paused, drawing a shaky breath. And I want you to know that your sacrifice wasn't in vain. Dad, Nathan, he's taken such good care of me just like you hoped he would. Nathan stepped forward, placing his hand on Jordan's back. Diane wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her brother and nephew share this profound moment of healing. Thank you, Jordan continued, addressing the headstone. Thank you for loving me enough to make sure I'd be safe. I understand now, and I promise to live a life that would make you proud. A warm breeze rustled through the cemetery's trees, carrying the sweet scent of nearby flowering bushes. Jordan stood slowly, feeling lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't known he was carrying had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The community center buzzed with warmth and laughter as families gathered to welcome home Dr. Nathan Daniels, Jordan, Diane, and Emily. Colorful banners hung from the ceiling, and tables laden with homemade dishes lined the walls. The aroma of fresh-baked cookies and coffee filled the air. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly patient of Nathan's, approached them with tears in her eyes. Dr. Daniels, if it wasn't for your kindness in letting me pay my bills in installments, I wouldn't have gotten the care I needed, she said, squeezing his hand. Other townspeople shared their own stories. Mr. Rodriguez spoke about how Jordan had helped his daughter feel welcome at school when she first arrived from Mexico. Ms. Chen recalled how Diane had guided her through the complex process of finding care for her aging mother. This clinic isn't just a medical facility, said Mr. Patterson, the local grocer. It's the heart of our community. As the gathering continued, Mayor Evelyn Brooks made her way through the crowd. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she pulled Nathan aside. Dr. Daniels, I have a proposition for you, she said, spreading out some papers on a nearby table. The town council and I have been discussing the possibility of expanding your clinic into a full-fledged community health center. We could offer more services, reach more people who need help. Nathan's eyes widened as he studied the proposal. The mayor continued, "The town is willing to provide matching funds and support. What do you think?" Nathan called Jordan and Diane over to look at the plans. Jordan's face lit up as he examined the drawings. "This could help so many people," he said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. Diane nodded, already thinking about the social services they could incorporate. "We could create something really special here," she added. Later that evening, Nathan, Jordan, and Diane sat around their kitchen table, cups of hot chocolate steaming before them. The proposal papers lay spread out between them. "I've been thinking," Jordan said, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "What if we named it after Mom? The Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center." Nathan reached across the table and squeezed Jordan's hand. "That's perfect," he said softly. "Your mother's greatest wish was to help others. This would be a beautiful way to honor her memory." Diane wiped a tear from her eye. "Sarah would have loved this," she agreed, "using her story to create something that will help families for generations to come." They all nodded in agreement, feeling the rightness of the decision settle over them. The health center would be their way of transforming past pain into future hope, creating a legacy that would touch countless lives in their community. The summer sun beat down on the construction site as workers laid the foundation for the Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center. Jordan Daniels stood beside his father, Dr. Nathan Daniels, both of them shielding their eyes as they watched the concrete being poured. The rhythmic sounds of machinery and workers' voices filled the air, creating a symphony of progress. "Can I help?" Jordan asked, already rolling up his sleeves. "I want to be part of building this place." Nathan smiled warmly at his son's enthusiasm. "Check with Mr. Rodriguez, the site foreman. He might have some tasks you can assist with." Soon, Jordan found himself working alongside the construction crew, carrying supplies and helping wherever he could. The workers welcomed his eagerness, teaching him basic construction skills and sharing stories about their own families. Every evening, Jordan returned home exhausted but satisfied, covered in dust and wearing a proud smile. One afternoon, while taking a water break, Jordan noticed Emily Carter approaching the construction site. Her face wore an unusual expression, a mix of excitement and uncertainty. In her hands, she clutched an envelope. "Jordan," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "I got some news." They sat together on a stack of lumber, away from the noise of the construction. Emily's hand shook as she opened the envelope and pulled out a letter bearing an international postmark. "I got accepted," she said softly. "The Art Institute in Paris. Full scholarship." Jordan's heart swelled with pride even as it ached. "Emily, that's amazing," he exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. But when they pulled apart, both their eyes held traces of worry. "It's a 3-year program," Emily continued, her voice catching. "I'd be gone most of the year, except for holidays." The reality of their situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Jordan looked at the half-built walls of the health center, then back at Emily. They had grown so close over the past years, sharing secrets, dreams, and the weight of everything that had happened with the Caldwell family. That evening, Jordan and Emily walked to their favorite spot in the local park. The stars twinkled overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine. They sat on a wooden bench, their shoulders touching. "I don't want to hold you back," Jordan said, breaking the silence. "This is an incredible opportunity." Emily turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I don't want to leave you behind either," she replied. "But I keep thinking about what your mom did, how she made such a huge sacrifice for what she believed in." Jordan nodded, understanding the parallel. "She wanted everyone to chase their dreams," he said softly, "to live without fear." "We could make it work," Emily suggested, hope creeping into her voice. "There's video calls and holidays and summers." Jordan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I want you to go to Paris," he said firmly. "I'll be here building Mom's legacy and you'll be there creating beautiful art. We'll support each other no matter what." Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, relief washing over her. "Promise?" "Promise," Jordan replied, his voice steady and sure. They sat together under the stars, their hearts full of both hope and sadness, understanding that sometimes love means supporting someone else's dreams, even when it's difficult. Dark clouds gathered ominously over the construction site of the Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center. The wind picked up, sending loose papers and debris flying through the air. Within minutes, the storm unleashed its fury with heavy rain and fierce gusts battering the partially completed structure. Dr. Nathan Daniels watched helplessly from his car as portions of the unfinished walls crumbled under the assault. When the storm finally passed, the damage was evident. Waterlogged materials, collapsed scaffolding, and mud everywhere. "This is going to set us back weeks," the foreman said, surveying the destruction, "and the replacement materials. It's not going to be cheap." Nathan's shoulders slumped as he calculated the additional costs in his head. The budget was already tight, and this unexpected setback threatened to derail the entire project. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, his worry evident in the deep lines creasing his forehead. Jordan couldn't bear to see his father so distressed. After a sleepless night, he approached Emily and Diane with an idea. "We need to do something," he said firmly. "This health center means everything to Dad and to Mom's memory." Emily's eyes lit up. "What about a charity concert? My art teacher knows lots of local musicians, and the community center has that great outdoor amphitheater." Diane nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out her phone to make notes. "I can handle the logistics and permits. Jordan, you could reach out to local businesses for sponsorships." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Jordan went door to door, speaking passionately about the health center's mission. Emily designed beautiful posters featuring Sarah Mitchell's photograph, while Diane coordinated with vendors and performers. The response was overwhelming. Local restaurants offered to provide food for the event. Musicians volunteered their time. Even the high school drama club prepared a special performance. People Jordan had never met showed up at their door with donations and offers to help. The day of the fundraiser arrived with perfect weather. The amphitheater filled with families carrying picnic baskets and lawn chairs. Children ran around with face paint while local bands performed on stage. Tables displayed silent auction items donated by businesses, and the air was filled with the aroma of grilled food and the sound of laughter. Nathan stood at the edge of the crowd, taking in the scene with moistening eyes. Jordan approached and put an arm around his father's shoulders. "Look at all these people, Dad," Jordan said softly. "They're here because they believe in what we're doing." Diane joined them, clipboard in hand. "The silent auction alone has raised enough to cover the storm damage," she announced, beaming, "and we're still counting ticket sales and donations." Nathan looked around at the sea of familiar faces, patients from his clinic, parents of Jordan's classmates, shopkeepers, teachers, and countless others who had become part of their extended family. In that moment, he understood that the Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center wasn't just their dream anymore. It belonged to everyone. The bustling airport terminal hummed with activity as Jordan Daniels and Emily Carter stood facing each other, both trying to delay their inevitable goodbye. Emily clutched her carry-on bag, her other hand holding the small golden locket that had once belonged to Sarah Mitchell. "I'll wear it every day," Emily promised, her voice wavering slightly. "It'll remind me of you and everything we've been through together." Jordan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He carefully unrolled the sketch Emily had given him. A beautifully rendered portrait of himself sitting at the construction site of the health center, deep in thought. The detail was incredible, capturing not just his appearance but something deeper, more essential about who he was. "You've always seen me so clearly," Jordan managed, carefully tucking the sketch into his jacket. They embraced tightly as the final boarding call echoed through the terminal. Emily wiped away tears as she walked toward the security checkpoint, turning back one last time to wave before disappearing into the crowd. Back home, Jordan found a package waiting on his desk. Margaret Stevens had dropped it off earlier that day. Inside was a cream-colored envelope, the paper aged but well-preserved. His hands trembled as he recognized his mother's handwriting. "My dearest Jordan," the letter began. "If you're reading this, you've grown into the young man I always knew you would become. I want you to know that love isn't something that divides when shared. It multiplies. Don't be afraid to open your heart. to chase your dreams, to make the world better in whatever way calls to you. Jordan read the letter 3 times, each word seeming to resonate more deeply. Sarah's voice, though he'd never heard it, felt clear and present in her written words. She wrote about her own dreams of helping others through nursing, her hopes that he might find similar fulfillment in whatever path he chose. That evening, Jordan sat at his desk, surrounded by medical school brochures and early admission applications. The construction sounds from the health center drifted through his window as he began filling out the forms. His mother's letter lay open beside him, her words fueling his determination. "I'm applying to the early admission program," he announced to Nathan at dinner. "I want to be a doctor, like you. I want to help people, like Mom did." Nathan's face lit up with pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Jordan. So am I." Jordan touched the sketch Emily had given him, now framed on his wall, and thought about the locket traveling with her across the ocean. Despite the physical distance between them, he felt connected, to Emily, to his mother's memory, to his growing sense of purpose. With renewed focus, he turned back to his applications, ready to take the next step toward his future. The morning of the Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center's grand opening dawned bright and clear. Jordan Daniels stood in the lobby, adjusting a framed photograph of his mother that would hang prominently near the entrance. Dr. Nathan Daniels carefully arranged chairs in the courtyard, while Diane Daniels coordinated with the catering team. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Jordan asked, his fingers lingering on the frame's edge. "She already was proud, son," Nathan replied, placing a gentle hand on Jordan's shoulder. "This just proves she was right about you all along." Community members streamed in and out, carrying flowers and helping with last-minute preparations. The air buzzed with excitement as volunteers hung banners and arranged refreshment tables. Every detail had been carefully chosen to honor both Sarah's memory and the townspeople's contributions. As the ceremony began, rows of chairs filled with familiar faces from throughout their journey. Mayor Evelyn Brooks approached the podium, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Today we celebrate more than just a building," she began. "We celebrate the power of love, community, and perseverance. The Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center stands as a testament to what we can achieve when we stand together." Jordan's heart pounded as he took his place at the podium. Looking out at the sea of faces, he saw the people who had supported him through every challenge, who had helped make his mother's legacy a reality. "My mother believed in the power of helping others," Jordan said, his voice steady and clear. "She protected me so I could live to make a difference. But I couldn't have honored her memory without Dr. Nathan Daniels, who chose to take in a stranger's child, or Diane Daniels, who helped guide us through our darkest moments. And I couldn't have done it without all of you, who showed me what community truly means." The moment arrived for the ribbon cutting. As Nathan handed Jordan the scissors, gasps of awe rippled through the crowd. The construction barriers fell away, revealing a stunning mural on the building's exterior wall. Emily's artwork captured everything the center represented, gentle hands cradling a heart, surrounded by symbols of healing and hope. Though she couldn't be there in person, her artistic vision spoke volumes about the center's mission of compassion and unity. The crowd erupted in applause as Jordan cut the ribbon, officially opening the doors of the Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center. Tears of joy and pride flowed freely as community members embraced, celebrating not just the completion of a building but the triumph of love over fear, of community over isolation. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Jordan Daniels finished his shift at the Sarah Mitchell Community Health Center. He was reviewing patient files when a familiar voice broke through his concentration. "Surprise?" Emily Carter stood in the doorway, her smile as bright as ever. Jordan's face lit up with joy as he rushed to embrace her. "Emily! I thought you weren't coming back until Christmas." Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement as she settled into a chair across from his desk. "I couldn't wait that long. Plus, I have amazing news." She pulled out her phone, showing Jordan articles featuring her artwork in international galleries. The mural here caught the attention of some art critics. They say it captures the essence of human connection and healing. "That's incredible, Em!" Jordan beamed with pride. "I knew you'd take the art world by storm." Their catch-up was interrupted by a knock at the door, Dr. Nathan Daniels entered, holding an official-looking envelope. "This came for you, Jordan." Jordan's hands trembled as he recognized the medical school's logo. Taking a deep breath, he opened the letter and began to read. His eyes widened, and tears welled up. "I got in," he whispered, then louder. "I got in. Full scholarship." Nathan immediately pulled him into a tight hug. Diane Daniels, who had been passing by, rushed in upon hearing the commotion. The news spread quickly through the center, with staff and volunteers gathering to congratulate him. Later that evening, Nathan and Jordan stood outside the health center, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Patients and volunteers moved in and out of the building, each greeting them warmly as they passed. "Your mother would be proud," Nathan said softly, his eyes fixed on the mural that had brought Emily such success. Jordan nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "She lives on through us and everyone we help." Diane and Emily joined them outside, completing their circle. They stood together, arms around each other, watching as the health center continued its vital work, a living testament to Sarah Mitchell's legacy of love and sacrifice. If you enjoyed the story of Nathan and Jordan, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.